For my project, I wanted to make a group tab manager for the Google Chrome browser. Um, this is gonna be interesting because I'm gonna probably use it live for my demo. Um, and basically, what I made was a Chrome extension that uses the browser's new grouping feature. Um, it expands on the currently existing default functions with the options to group by the current tab's URL, the currently open window, all the tabs in the session, and gives you the ability to clear all the existing groups at once. And as just a little thing to test the API, I just added a small feature to monitor the system's current memory usage. Um, why I chose this? I'll be real here. I kind of tried to think, how am I going to balance two thesis projects that have nothing to do each other? Because as much as I like to, my two majors, computer science and Japanese, had very little in common. Um, Ideas I had for something that favored computer science might be a little too complicated for Japanese, and apps I thought of for that could be used for Japanese were a little too simple for computer science. So I ended up doing something that I felt like given my amount of time and availability, I could get something functional done. And previously I took Professor Mahoney's web development course, so it already built off of my skills of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Um, when I got started, I just started looking up, first of all, how to do Chrome extensions in general. So I found a few tutorials on YouTube, such as one that counts bears on how many times the word bears appears on a web page, and then I found um, these tutorials by this channel called the Coding Train, and that one especially helped me figure out basically how um, Google Chrome extensions are structured. So it helped me because I got to do extensions that let me modify text straight on the web page. Um, helped me figure out how to put JavaScript into uh, pop up, specifically by loading a maze inside one. And it gave me a better understanding of how these different parts of the Google Chrome um, browser connects with each other. Because prior to that, really my only skill was on how to build websites, but maybe not so much the browser itself. Um, with the coding train, along with the JavaScript and HTML, it introduced me to p5.js, which was more or less a beginner's tool library for developing applications and visualizing them. Ultimately, I didn't keep up with it with my current version for my extension. It was more so I could just visualize what it was going to look like without having to set up the HTML and CSS. But it definitely helped me test the functionality of it. Uh, what I learned how to manipulate web pages, um, not specifically in the context of a content page, which is the basically the website's own code, not so much the browser. It told me how to store information within the browser itself through a background page. Um, it told me the importance about pop-up windows and how these different parts interact. And most importantly, it told me how to navigate the Chrome extension API. So I mostly used the Chrome tabs and tab groups portions of that. Challenges I faced, time management had to be the biggest one. Where when I started off this project fall semester, I was doing those tutorials throughout all the way through winter break. But this is kind of where the issue of COVID-19 sort of struck, where I wasn't sure whether or not I'd be studying abroad. So juggling two theses and that thought of dangling if I'm gonna go or not definitely made it hard for me to manage my time. And ultimately, I'd say the worst case scenario happened where my study abroad was canceled, and adv- but to make up for it, my advisors were like, "Don't worry, you can make up for those credits by adding on those two more classes on top of your thesis, two theses projects." So it was personally pretty tough. Project scale, I if things did go according to how I wanted it to go initially, I would have thought, okay, I can make a Chrome extension with all the features. Maybe I could like figure out how to mod the browser itself through Chromium or something like that. But ultimately, I didn't realize just how much potential an extension in itself had. So I'm going to demo my extension real quick. So it's this little icon here. I used some existing CSS from a previous personal project because I like the 8-bit aesthetic. So here we have the memory usage. Um, so to give you an example, I have two separate windows opened up within the same session. You could group your when you could group your tabs basically by window. So everything within this window is now part of its own group, which you could toggle like that. And that was part of Google Chrome starting last year, and it became a feature that extensions could use um, within the Chrome web browser just recently, which was if I do decide to post this on the Chrome store, then that would be very helpful. So you could group it by window. Um, this one was probably the one I used most often, which was grouped by URL. So I I'm the kind of person who does open about 20 tabs all at once, and it does get hard to keep track of. So when I group by URL, um, everything in this particular group is under the Google URL. And then finally, I have the option to group by all, which you saw earlier. There was another window, but now all of those tabs are under one group. And then finally, you could clear that group. And I think there's a lot of potential for grouping. Um, there were four existing functions over here from the browser itself, but they didn't do what I set out to do. So, if anything, this is more so to expand its uses. Let me get back to my computer tab. Um, what I'd like to do in the future, I really wanted to implement a queuing and suspend feature, which would involve. There was another tab manager I came across, which is called One Tab, and essentially what it did was it would take all of your tabs and then push it into a web page that could be visited later. And in my head, I had a way of doing it, but again, because of time management purposes, I couldn't get around to it. And I want to implement a suspend feature, which is what another extension, the Great Suspender, which I just want to let people know don't download that because I heard it might have some malware in it. Um, it was a feature that that one used, and it's supposed to reduce memory. Uh, I would have liked to experiment more with front end libraries like React, which I did see with Mahoney's web development course. But for now, the like I said, my existing resources with CSS and HTML did just fine. And I do wish I communicate with more people to get ideas of what they would like to see this program do. Um, just to give you an idea of some of the practices I also did, there was here's that example of a maze showing up in a pop-up. Um, I don't think that's the one I wanted. And then this one would take uh, basically a highlighted text and then from a web page and then make it show up in a pop-up, which shows the relationship between those two parts of the browser. And ultimately, yeah, those queuing and suspend features would have used that inner relationship more. But again, timing made it a little difficult. So essentially, yes, that was my thesis project.
Okay, who's got some questions for Christian?
I have a question.
Sure.
So, Chris, would you say that a majority of your thesis was the learning process as opposed to the final product?
It was mostly the learning process. There were times when I was so boggled by tabs, I was just like, man, I really wish there was an extension for this. And then I was like, wait a minute, hold on, I could do that. So a lot of times it was kind of just tailoring this project to my own needs. So I would use the URL and window feature pretty often just for my own practicality. And then I also made this little visualizer just to think like this would be a great idea if somebody did it. Then I realized, oh wait, Google is doing it. This is a feature they are working on. So it saved me the effort of actually developing groups at all, and more so learning how the API uses it.
How much would you say from what you had to write for the actual extension? So you had the Chrome API for the how much additional what did you have to write yourself versus just using learning what API calls to use and what does that the actual coding process look like?
Um, the coding process was actually a lot like how I experienced web development, where Google would offer very basic commands such as how to query your tabs and then functions of grouping tabs. So in essence, I had to figure out, okay, how am I going to combine these smaller basic commands to group it by my parameters? And I'd have to say the most complex was figuring out how to parse the URL and then query all the tabs by URL. Memory usage didn't use the tabs portion, it used the system memory. So I just tried to do the math to calculate available capacity of your system versus total capacity, and then made a percentage based off of that.
Okay, other questions for Chris? Well, Chris, very good. Let's give Chris a round. Use your hands, use your emoji.